In 2025, Sammy Sosa, the man who once made all of America hold its breath with wind-tearing swings, sits alone in the spacious room of his Miami home. On the TV screen, the summer of 1998 plays again like a sacred film, footage of Sosa kissing two fingers, pointing to the sky, then sprinting around Wrigley Field amid the frenzied roars of the crowd. He once hit 66 home runs in a single season, crossed the 60 home run mark 3 times, something no one in MLB history had ever done. He was once the symbol of hope, of the immigrant dream, of a brown-skinned man from poverty could not break, who made America lift its head again after the devastating 1994 strike. The press once called him the man who saved baseball. American households once hung his posters in their living rooms. The summer of '98 was considered one of the rare moments America felt united, and the man at the center of that miracle was Sammy Sosa. But as the screen keeps replaying those golden home runs, the 57-year-old man remains motionless, his eyes unable to catch the old joy. Because behind that glory lay long years heavy with pain and oblivion. America once hailed him as a hero, yet the same America turned its back with ruthless speed. The corked-bat scandal, the congressional testimony, doping suspicions, the feud with the Cubs, all of them knives plunged into the legacy he had poured his youth into building. The mockery about his lightened skin, the degrading memes, the ice-cold Hall of Fame votes under 5%, each one a reminder that a legend can be erased with a single fall. And though his heart is covered in scars, Sosa still endures, still stands tall, still gives all his love to his family and to the Dominican Republic. The same will that forged his greatness in 1998 is what keeps him alive today, in silence, but never defeated. If you want to keep following the tragic yet extraordinary journey of Sammy Sosa from a dark room in Miami back to a destitute childhood in the Dominican Republic, hit subscribe right now. And to understand why that solitary man has never once collapsed, we have to go back to where it all began, a childhood where darkness crept into every breath. Sammy Sosa was born in San Pedro de Macorís, Dominican Republic, in a house so small a strong gust could blow the door wide open. He was only 6 when his father, Juan Bautista Montero, suddenly died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Death arrived as softly as a sigh, but the aftermath crashed down like the entire sky. 7 children stood around the old bed, none understanding what had just happened, only knowing the family's sole pillar had vanished, leaving an endless abyss. His mother, Mireya, panicked but was not allowed to break. She had to turn grief into hands that worked day and night. Yet poverty knows no mercy. The roof leaked whenever it rained, each drop falling into the empty pot in the tiny kitchen like a countdown to the next wave of hunger. Some days Sammy and his siblings ate cold rice with salt, the only thing left in the house. His shoes were torn from toe to heel, every step a reminder that poverty would never leave this family. Sammy grew up not with toys or books, but with lack that wore childhood away. From the age of 5 he already had to work, shining shoes on the street by day, washing rich people's cars at night. The few coins he brought home each evening were survival for 7 mouths. Sometimes he slept on the front porch because the house was too crowded, or simply because the Caribbean heat turned the room into an oven. And it was there, on the cold cement floor, that Sammy heard his stomach growl all night. That feeling, hunger so intense he couldn't sleep, became a memory that followed him for life. In Consuelo every child was poor, but Sammy was so poor the neighbors called him Muchachito sin nada, the little boy with nothing at all. He always stood at the back of the line when charity food was handed out, usually left with only crumbs. But the cruelest thing was not hunger, it was invisibility. No one remembered his name. No one thought the small dark-skinned boy with sun-bleached hair would ever become somebody. The world forgot his name before it even learned to spell it. That sentence could have been written for thousands of Caribbean children, but for Sammy it became prophecy of a life the world would remember, then deliberately forget. In that world, baseball was not just a sport, it was the only ticket out. Sammy and the neighborhood kids used broom handles as bats and rolled up old socks stuffed with rags as balls. Their ragged games took place on dusty dirt lots, every hit ringing out like proof that hope still existed. But hope never came easy. Some days Sammy was so exhausted, he collapsed on the ground after work, yet he still grabbed the homemade bat when the other kids called his name. His mother once watched him play and whispered a sentence Sammy carried for life: "You have to swing harder than your fear." Those words became his compass, not just in baseball, but every time the world tried to snuff him out. And so, from leaking roofs, endless hungry nights, and mornings shining shoes barefoot, an extraordinary will was forged, a will strong enough to turn a poor boy into a national icon, a will that would help him survive the years to come, when the same country that once worshipped him would abandon him without mercy. From the mud of Consuelo, Sammy Sosa did not merely grow up, he was tempered into steel. And from the place where no one believed he could rise, that boy began the journey to legend, only to experience both the greatest glory and the cruelest betrayal sport can inflict on a human being. Leaving Consuelo with calloused hands and a heart full of hope, Sammy believed America would be the door to a new life. When the Texas Rangers signed him in 1985, it was not just a contract, it was a promise to escape poverty, a chance to give back to his mother and 7 siblings everything life had stolen. His first ever plane ride from San Pedro de Macorís to Florida, and then Texas, was the flight of a boy convinced his dream waited on the other side of the sky. He had never been on a plane, never left the island, never understood enough English to follow a conversation, but he carried ironclad faith: "America will change your life." Those were his mother's words as she saw him off at the airport, hiding her red eyes. But when he set foot in America, reality did not smile the way he had dreamed. It laughed in his face. Sammy walked into the Rangers clubhouse like a child lost among cold adults. His torn shoes were stared at, his clumsy English became a joke. Some teammates mimicked his accent, calling him Lost Boy, the Dominican Project, or worse, He Won't Last. Early coaches said he had no tactics, no modern baseball mind, raw talent but slow brain. Those words did not just hurt, they tore apart the fragile hope of an immigrant who had barely found his footing. The America he had dreamed of was a ticket out of the hell of poverty. The real America he faced felt like a clubhouse where contemptuous looks cut deeper than any pitch. Treated as an outsider, isolated, undervalued simply because of his skin color and broken English. The sense of betrayal started with the smallest things. No one sat with him at meals, no one explained drills, no one told him where to stand or when to run. He was left alone in the very team that was supposed to nurture his talent. So Sammy did the only thing he knew: he threw himself into practice. Not to prove anything to them, but to keep the faith his mother had placed in him the day he left the island. By day he trained with everyone else, but after the lights went out he came back, alone. No catcher, no coach, just an old net and his own hands. He hit until blisters burst and blood soaked the bat handle. He hit until his hands shook from exhaustion, until breathing itself hurt. Some nights security had to wake him because he had fallen asleep on the artificial turf. People mocked his dream, but that was when Sammy realized the dream didn't need anyone else to believe in it. It only needed him. Yet the deepest pain did not come from blood and sweat. It came from profound loneliness. On his first night in Texas he wrote to his mother, "Mom, America is colder than I thought." He wasn't talking about the weather, he was talking about people's hearts. He had believed America would save him, welcome him, give him the chance the Dominican Republic could not. Instead, the first America Sammy met was the America of suspicion, discrimination, and doubt. The same feeling of invisibility he knew as a child. And that feeling, the feeling of being betrayed by the country he trusted most, quietly left the first scar on Sammy Sosa's heart. A scar that would stay with him for life, even when he became a national hero. But from that very betrayal, the steel inside him began to rise. Sammy had not come to America to give up, he had come to live. And he swore to himself that if America refused to see him, he would force it to look clearly, forever. But before he became a legend, he would suffer more wounds, and not all of them would come from enemies. Many would come from the same hands that once applauded him. And then, just as the coldness of Texas was about to crush his hope, fate took him to the place that would both save him and hurt him more than anything he had ever known: Chicago. The Windy City, the city of steel, the city of blunt, rough-edged people, and the city that would carve his name into history before ripping it from collective memory. When he was traded to the Chicago Cubs in 1992, Sammy stood at the crossroads of survival. The Rangers had treated him like dead weight. The White Sox saw potential but lacked faith. But the Cubs, a franchise cursed by decades of heartbreak, bet on something no one else valued properly, his heart. And Chicago became the first city that did not treat him as an outsider. But welcome did not mean easy. In his early Cubs years, Sammy faced a new, more sophisticated kind of wound, from people who meant well. Some coaches whispered behind his back, "He's talented, but not smart enough for this game." Some teammates were blunter, "He swings too wild. He's uncoachable." And the Chicago press, among the toughest in America, wrote that he brought more power than baseball intelligence. Those words stabbed like daggers into a man who had spent his entire life being undervalued because of poverty and Latin roots. But Chicago was also where Sammy felt something for the first time he had never known, being loved. Not the curiosity of Texas, not the skeptical stares of old clubhouses. This was real, loud, honest, boiling love, from Cubs fans. When Sammy ran onto Wrigley Field for the first time, he heard the crowd chant his name, not mocking, not doubting, cheering, a sensation his entire previous life had never given him. Every powerful swing shook the bleachers, every homer detonated the crowd like thunder, and with every game, the story of the boy from a poor Dominican town began seeping into Chicago's heart. But that love came at a price Sammy did not yet understand, the price of becoming a symbol. Chicago, a city starving for a hero, started loading an invisible burden onto his back. When he played well, they called him Hope of the Cubs. When he struggled, they asked, "Where is the real Sosa?" Fan pressure was love mixed with desperation. Team pressure was expectation laced with doubt. Media pressure was praise laced with veiled warnings. All of it landed on his shoulders at once. Outside the lines he smiled, waved, signed balls for kids. Inside he knew he was not allowed to fail, not allowed to tire, not allowed to step back. Because if he stepped back, Chicago would collapse again, and he would once more be the forgotten poor kid from the Dominican Republic. After teammates left, Sammy stayed behind hitting until his hands went numb, running double sessions to prove he deserved the city's roar. Some nights stadium staff had to beg him to go home, but Sammy didn't go home. He once said, "If I rest today, I lose tomorrow." Chicago saved him from the invisibility America had once forced on him. But Chicago also planted the seed of future pain, the seed of being loved so fiercely you have to pay with pieces of yourself. And though those early years were filled with criticism that he was not smart enough for MLB, Sammy stood firm. Because for the first time in his life he had something childhood never gave him, the belief of an entire city. But he did not know that love and pain in Chicago would follow him forever. It would lift him to the heavens, and then the same place would throw him into hell without mercy. But before everything collapsed, Sammy still had one chance to touch paradise. One single summer when all of America looked up at him as a hero. The summer of 1998, the summer that changed everything. The summer that took him to the absolute peak, and planted the seed for the deepest fall in MLB history. But it wasn't until the summer of 1998 that Sammy Sosa's fate, and America's, truly turned. It was the summer a divided, weary, cynical nation suddenly found hope in every swing of an immigrant from Consuelo. Baseball had just survived the 1994 strike, a wound so deep fans turned away, stadiums emptied, trust was shredded. MLB stood on the edge of collapse, and no one imagined a Latin player with stumbling English could be the one to resurrect it. Yet that is exactly what Sammy Sosa did. Every swing felt like it struck straight into America's heart, not with perfection, but with raw authenticity, with a fire no one could extinguish. When Sosa entered the home run race against Mark McGwire, the entire country woke up. McGwire had power, fame, and the image of a steel-bodied white American giant. Sammy had heart, and that heart beat so loudly millions heard it. It was the summer he hit 20 home runs in June alone, an incomprehensible number. It was the summer he broke the 60 home run barrier, something previously considered an impossible dream. But the public never saw the price each of those home runs exacted. Every swing was so violent the skin on his hands tore, blood soaking his batting gloves. His back ached constantly. Mornings he had to crawl out of bed instead of stand. His right shoulder muscles swelled from overload. Medical staff iced him after every game just so he could play the next day. Sammy later said that in the middle of the 1998 summer, he couldn't sleep because turning over felt like a knife stabbing from shoulder to spine. Yet he still took the field, still smiled, still kissed two fingers and pointed skyward before every swing, a prayer to his late father. Some nights in hotel rooms he stared at the ceiling wondering if his body could survive one more game. But the moment he thought of his mother and the poor Dominican kids watching him on TV, he got up again. At Wrigley Field, children climbed onto their parents' shoulders screaming "Slammin' Sammy," as if calling a superhero. Frail elderly Dominican women cried when they saw him wave the American flag, because they saw an immigrant not just survive but triumph. He didn't just hit home runs. He shattered division. He shattered post-strike doubt about America. He shattered his own memories of poverty. Each swing a vow. "I survived, Mommy." And then came the fateful day, when he and McGuire, two men from different worlds, stood side by side in front of hundreds of cameras. When McGuire broke Maris's record, Sammy was the first to run out and hug him. That moment made all of America cry. The kindness was so genuine it melted every heart. The summer of 1998 was not just about home runs. It was about hope, about reconciliation, about a former shoeshine boy becoming the embodiment of strength and resilience. And in that most beautiful moment, Sammy became the man who saved baseball. The press hailed him as savior. Fans clapped until their hands hurt. Stadiums sold out just because he was playing. Children copied his swing. The whole country wore number 21. But like every classic tragedy, the brightest light always plants the darkest shadow. When Sosa reached the absolute peak of fame, envy began to creep in. Some reporters wrote that no one could gain that much power so fast without help. Some teammates whispered he was favored too much. Analysts said he was one-dimensional, wild swing not refined enough to sustain it. Those words were small but deep cuts, quietly destroying the mind of a man who had poured his whole heart into bringing joy to an entire nation. And farther away, in small bars and hidden forums, people began asking, is this even real? Can Sammy Sosa really be this good without something extra? He didn't know it, but the sky was starting to darken. Tiny cracks appeared in the halo. The summer of 1998 was the most beautiful summer of his life, and it was the summer that sowed the seeds for the most terrible tragedies Sammy Sosa would ever face. Because when the world lifts you too high, it will find a way to push you down just as far to watch how hard you fall. But even while the summer of '98 was still burning warm in fans' hearts, invisible cold winds had already begun blowing through the Chicago Cubs clubhouse. That was where the silent war took shape, creeping into every glance, every half-joking remark, every moment backs turned when he walked in. On the outside, the Cubs looked like a united team in a historic season. But inside those four sweaty walls filled with slamming lockers and hard-soled shoes on concrete floors, jealousy was stirring. Some teammates no longer looked at Sammy with admiration, they looked at him with calculation. To them, Sammy wasn't just a teammate, he was a shadow too large, a star too bright. And like every cutthroat competitive environment, when one man shines too brightly, everyone else feels eclipsed. Sammy started hearing whispers behind his back. He gets too much attention. He's the media's favorite. He's not that smart a player. Some were colder. He's not one of us. He's Dominican. He doesn't get the way we do things here. Those words took him straight back to Texas. The feeling of being treated as an outsider, because of language, skin color, immigrant roots. But this time it hurt more. Because this time the people turning away weren't strangers. They were the same guys who had celebrated with him, hugged him after every home run, called him brother. Alex Gonzalez, a close teammate, later said Sammy didn't say it out loud, but he felt it. The jealousy, the tension, the distance. The media, always gasoline on any fire, made everything worse. Stories about Sosa flooded every front page. He was on magazine covers, billboards, national TV shows. And American media, like America itself, always loves someone passionately, right before it finds reasons to tear them apart, piece by piece. Is Sosa too big for the Cubs? Is the fame going to his head? Is this performance real? Those headlines weren't just words. They were needles poking at the already shaky image he had in the clubhouse. Some teammates started avoiding him. Others stopped eating lunch with him. And when Sammy walked into press conferences, he could feel the cameras no longer aimed only at his achievements. They were aimed at any mistake that could become a scandal. If he showed up 5 minutes late, the press wrote he had lost discipline. When he did a big sports brand interview, they said he cared more about money than the team. When he smiled too big, they called him arrogant. When he smiled less, they said he was worn down by fame. No matter what he did, he was wrong. And right there, in the middle of his glorious summer, cracks started forming. Sammy kept the smile that made millions love him. The sun-bright smile of the summer of '98, made famous. But inside that smile, the first seeds of doubt had sprouted. He could feel the suspicious stares. The pressure on his shoulders was no longer the normal pressure of an athlete. It was the pressure of a country that had placed its faith in him, and was ready to take it back at any second. And then, quieter than any criticism, came Sammy's deepest fear, the fear that everything he had worked to build was standing on sand. Some nights he slipped out of the hotel and sat alone on the balcony, looking down at the glittering Chicago skyline. He thought about his mother back in the Dominican, about the swings that made his hands throb with pain, about the crowd roaring for him, about the kids screaming "Slammin' Sammy," and then he asked himself, do they really love me, or do they just love winning? He didn't know that question would torture him for years, because the cruel truth is, in the hearts of fans, love and suspicion always walk together. In the hearts of teammates, jealousy and admiration can coexist. In the media, building someone up and tearing them down are separated by only one article. Those 1998 cracks, the envious looks, the ambiguous headlines, the awkward clubhouse silences, were all seeds of the massive storm coming. A storm that would not only destroy Sammy's career, it would destroy the way America saw him. And in the quiet of the late 1990s, Sammy had no idea that one single mistake, one broken bat, would be enough for the world to turn its back forever. The night of June 3, 2003, the Chicago sky gave no warning of any storm. But for Sammy Sosa, that was the night his entire career, honor and America's love collapsed in one swing. A moment shorter than a blink, yet powerful enough to shred 2 decades of effort. The Cubs were facing the Tampa Bay Devil Rays at Wrigley Field, a meaningless mid-season game for most players. But for Sammy, every game was a reminder he still had to prove he deserved the faith, the expectations, the roar of Chicago. He stepped into his first at-bat the same way he had hundreds of times, calm, focused, broad shoulders carrying the stadium's hope. Then, crack, a sharp, clean sound, the sound baseball lovers usually crave, suddenly turned into a death knell. Sammy's bat shattered in an unnatural way, shattered in a way that made the umpire walk over, pick up the barrel, stare, and see something no one could believe. Cork, the illegal material that makes balls travel farther. The packed stadium fell into a strangled silence so heavy Sammy could hear his own heart hit the ground. On national television, millions of Americans watched the umpire hold up the broken bat, the cork clearly visible like evidence of a crime. The people who once called him Slammin' Sammy suddenly went dead quiet. The kids who saw him as a superhero stopped breathing. The people who hated him smiled. And Sammy stood there, in the middle of the diamond, feeling his familiar world turn into a prison with no exit. When the umpire approached and ejected him, Sammy didn't argue, didn't fight, didn't plead. He just stood still for a few seconds, longer than TV allowed, but long enough for the world to understand that in that instant he knew everything was over. Not the game, not the season, but his image in the heart of America. The man who saved baseball from social death in 1998 was now seen as the betrayer of national trust. Then came the flood. Commentators screamed, "Unbelievable! This is shocking. How could Sosa do this?" Hate-filled calls flooded Chicago radio. Newspapers ran knife-sharp headlines. Sammy Sosa, cheater. The fall of a hero. Baseball savior. Baseball disgrace. ESPN replayed the broken bat moment dozens of times that night, as if trying to burn it into every viewer's brain. But the cruelty didn't stop there. MLB immediately tested every remaining bat in Sosa's locker, 76 bats, including 5 already in the Hall of Fame, all clean. Not one had cork, not one shred of evidence he had ever cheated before. But truth no longer mattered. Once the American public believes an idol betrayed them, every piece of exonerating evidence is treated as an excuse. Sammy's whole life had taught him one thing: America loves hard, but it convicts lightning fast. He explained it was a batting practice bat accidentally grabbed. He apologized. He bowed his head. He spoke in his hard-earned English. But no one listened anymore. The media wanted a criminal. The public wanted someone to vent on. And Sammy, the immigrant who carried the hopes of millions of families, became the perfect target to tear apart. In the clubhouse after the game, Sammy didn't cry, didn't scream. He sat alone, staring at the hands that had bled from years of swings that cracked shoulder bones. The same hands that once pulled America out of despair. Now they were seen as the hands of a liar. A Cubs staff member later said, "He looked like someone who just lost more than a game." And he had. Sammy lost more than a game. He lost the innocence of believing that if he just worked hard enough, swung hard enough, gave everything, America would love him forever. But that broken bat proved the opposite. One mistake, intentional or not, and the world is ready to forget everything you ever did for them. When Sammy left the stadium that night, reporters swarmed him. Camera flashes exploded like slashes across his tired eyes. He walked past them head down, saying nothing. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew no one wanted to hear the truth from a man already convicted. And when he got in the car and closed the door, Chicago, the city that once treated him like an icon, turned its back in an instant. He looked out the window, and for a brief second the lights of Wrigley Field reflected on his face. The lights of what used to be paradise. The lights of what had just become hell. Sammy whispered, "How did it all change in one swing?" But he didn't yet know this was only the beginning. Suspicion had just awakened, and America, with its short memory and changeable heart, was preparing something even crueler, erasing his name from the very history of the sport he once saved. The corked bat scandal hadn't even settled when a bigger, more savage storm swallowed Sammy Sosa's entire legacy. It was the era history would later call by a chilling name: the steroid era, the time when anyone who hit too hard, ran too fast, or shone too bright became a suspect. No one was fully believed. No one was forgiven. And the brightest stars were always suspected first. Sammy, with his legendary 1998 summer, became the perfect target for an America panicking over the possibility its idols were tainted. Even though there never was an official verdict, never a public test that proved he used banned substances, Sammy was lumped together with the names branded baseball sinners, the ones who admitted, the ones caught red-handed, the ones who destroyed themselves with needles, just because he was too strong, too good, too bright, just because America couldn't accept that a shoeshine boy from the Dominican Republic could reach superhuman level through will and labor alone. Then 2005 arrived. The United States Congress held public hearings on steroids in MLB, a trial with no jury, no clear laws, but with the rage of an entire nation. Legends were summoned like defendants: Mark McGwire, Rafael Palmeiro, Curt Schilling, and Sammy Sosa. Sammy walked into the hearing room in a gray suit, hair neatly combed, hands trembling slightly from nerves. This wasn't Wrigley Field, where cheers once wrapped around him like a son coming home. This was a battlefield where all of America waited to see if their idol would crumble. And in that setting, Sammy, whose English was still imperfect, chose to use an interpreter to avoid mistakes. A legally smart choice that became a weapon for America to mock him. He doesn't even speak for himself. He's hiding behind a translator. He's guilty. Look how nervous he is. The media buried him without mercy. Networks looped every second he clenched his fists, every dry swallow, every translated answer that sounded choppy. Headlines screamed things like "from home run hero to congressional coward," turning him into a national joke. Sammy denied it, voice shaking but clear. "I have never taken illegal performance-enhancing drugs." But in that room, and outside it, no one wanted to hear. Not one word was believed. Not one sentence accepted. To Americans, he wasn't just facing Congress, he was facing America's rage. And the painful truth, in an era when all of MLB was stained by scandal, no one got a real chance to defend themselves. Everyone was a suspect, but those from poor places who spoke imperfect English were judged the harshest. When the hearing ended, Sammy walked out of the building to reporters shouting, "Are you lying? Did you cheat? Why won't you confess?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew nothing he said would matter. That was the cruelest moment, when a man realizes truth no longer matters in the world's eyes. Only the story the public wants to believe remains. And the public wanted a tragic ending. That night Sammy returned to his hotel, turned off all the lights, and sat in the dark. He turned on the TV, but switched it off the second he saw the news mocking his nervous appearance. He looked at the hands that once swung a bat hard enough to shake a nation, and for the first time in his life, he felt them as weak as the poor little boy's hands from long ago. One sentence echoed in his head, "I did everything. Why don't they believe me?" But he knew the answer. In the steroid era, every legend was dragged through the mud, guilty or innocent, admitted or not, evidence or no evidence. Suspicion had become unwritten law, and once America starts questioning you, it never stops. That night, a part of Sammy Sosa's soul died, not because he committed a crime, but because he realized his truth no longer had a place to live. And from that moment on, his fight was no longer against baseball, it was against America's merciless memory. The congressional collapse was only the first cut. The deepest, most painful cut came from the place he loved most, the Chicago Cubs, the team that gave him wings, and then broke them with their own hands. The 2004 season was Sammy's last in Chicago, but he had no idea it would also be the season his heart was torn to pieces. The clubhouse atmosphere was already tense after the corked-bat scandal and steroid-era whispers. But by 2004, cold indifference had replaced every feeling. Sammy walked into the clubhouse every day, like a man entering an old house now occupied by strangers. Cold eyes, half-hearted nods, conversations that died the moment he passed. His locker, once the center of laughter and admiration, became empty space no one wanted to stand near. No one asked about his kids anymore. No one slapped his shoulder before the game. No one said, "We need you today, Sammy." The cruelest part wasn't hatred. It was the casual disappearance of every feeling that once existed. Then October 3rd, 2004 arrived, the final game of the season. Sammy showed up physically and emotionally drained. He just wanted to finish the year, turn the page, or at least have one moment to prove he still belonged. But the Cubs didn't give him the chance. When he learned he wasn't starting, a humiliation for a franchise legend, Sammy left the stadium 15 minutes after arriving. No one saw the tears when the car door closed, but all of Chicago heard the sound of finality. The media instantly branded him with the word "no athlete ever once quitter," traitor. No one mentioned he had played through back pain so bad he couldn't stand straight. No one mentioned the pressure from scandals, hearings, and clubhouse isolation. No one said he had carried a dying team on his back for over a decade. All Chicago saw was a man walking away, and that was enough to smear an entire career. In an act still considered cruel and inhumane, Cubs management showed the entire team the video of Sammy leaving early, as an example. Some players laughed. Some shook their heads. Some openly said, "Good, he's done." It was no longer his team. It was a funeral home for his legacy. The season ended, and Sammy packed his things in silence. No one stood to say goodbye. No hugs, no thank yous. No one said they appreciated what he had done. A clubhouse that once blazed because of his presence was left with only cold emptiness where his locker stood. A stadium worker later said, "When he left that day it felt like Chicago lost something important but didn't realize it. Not yet." But Sammy realized it immediately. He lost the Cubs, lost the team that made him a legend. And worse, he lost his second home. lost the sense of belonging, lost the place that once cheered his name like a son returning victorious. When news broke the Cubs would trade him, Chicago didn't cry, they sighed in relief. Many fans said they were tired of Sammy. Some writers declared the Sosa era ended in shame. No one remembered he had saved the franchise from mediocrity. No one remembered the blood and tears he poured into that place. No one remembered he made Wrigley explode, like no one ever had. The people who once called him Slammin' Sammy now called him Selfish Sammy. His murals were taken down, his posters replaced with new faces. Cubs' 1998 celebrations happened without a single invitation sent to him. His legacy began being erased from Chicago that day, as if he had never existed. And the night Sammy left Chicago for the last time, he looked at the city through the taxi window, the streets that once blazed with fan cheers. Now everything was dark and cold like a silent farewell. He whispered to his faint reflection, "This was my home. Why does it hurt like this?" But that pain was only the beginning, because after Chicago what waited ahead was even crueler, America's forgetting, and Sammy would learn that losing a team hurts, but losing an entire nation that once loved you hurts 100 times more. Sammy left Chicago in a parting so cold no one could call it a career ending. It felt more like exile, but the way he left MLB was the most tragic part. No press conference, no retirement ceremony, no final lap of honor, not one thank you applause. A player with over 600 home runs, a number most of the world considers an automatic Hall of Fame passport, vanished from baseball like someone who never existed. No Sammy Sosa Appreciation Day, no retired number 21 hanging in the rafters, no final celebration where fans stood to honor him. MLB let Sammy drift out to sea like a rotten plank after a great storm. Other teams didn't want to sign him, not because he couldn't play another year, he absolutely could, but because the name Sammy Sosa had become a political, media and moral liability. Whoever signed him would be questioned, whoever gave him a chance would be suspected, so he left MLB through the back door, not the door of legends, the door of those the world turns its face from, away from stadium lights. Sammy began his second life, an exile no one talks about. Miami became his first refuge, a city of sun, luxury beaches, multi-million-dollar mansions, and Sammy bought one. A house so beautiful people thought he was enjoying riches after baseball, but they didn't see the nights he sat alone in a living room so big even the wind echoed. They didn't see his eyes when he watched old highlights, eyes searching for the man he used to be. Sammy lived in Miami like a temporary guest in his own life. He jogged the beach at dawn when no one recognized him anymore, partly because his appearance had changed, partly because time had faded his name from public memory. The media that once followed his every step went completely silent. No interviews, no check-ins, no one waiting for a comeback. And for a man once cheered by millions, that silence was more terrifying than any criticism. Then he moved to Dubai, a land of skyscrapers where no one cares about baseball, where he could become ordinary without scrutiny. He lived in a Palm Jumeirah villa, drove luxury cars, wore expensive suits, but that luxury was just glossy paint over the cracks in his heart. A man once considered the soul of MLB, the man who saved baseball from oblivion in 1998, now hiding in a city where no one knew his name. That is the worst kind of loneliness, loneliness surrounded by wealth. In one rare interview, Sammy himself said, "I live well, but sometimes I feel invisible." He didn't say alone, he said invisible. Those are the words of a man who once saw tens of thousands stand for him, and now no one remembers he ever existed. Baseball fans, the ones who carried him in their childhood memories, started forgetting him like an old chapter. The kids who screamed, "Slammin' Sammy," grew up, got busy with life, and let MLB be led by new faces. They remember McGuire, they remember Bonds, they remember Griffey, but Sammy, they remember then doubt, then go silent. And the media, they took the easiest path, pretending Sammy Sosa was never part of baseball history. Articles about the '98 era barely mention him. MLB produced videos cut out his highlights. Hall of Fame debates treat Sammy like a footnote. a name to skim past quickly. Even when his career is mentioned, they no longer call him the man who saved baseball, they call him a controversial figure, a cold, soulless phrase. And slowly, Sammy Sosa, the legend with 609 home runs, became a ghost in the very sport he once resurrected. He lingers faintly in memory, like a shadow from the past people don't want to face, a ghost lost between two worlds, too famous to disappear completely, too tainted to be remembered with respect. Miami, Dubai, Bahamas. Every place he stopped felt the same, beautiful, luxurious and empty. A legend exiled from the place that once called him savior. And in that exile, Sammy learned the bitterest truth. Sometimes the cruelest thing is not being hated, it's being forgotten. But the tragedy didn't end there, because the world didn't just turn away, it started mocking him in the most painful way possible. And it started with the very face he looked at every morning. But then, while Sammy was trying to live quietly in a foreign land, a new storm, crueler and more vicious than any previous scandal, began to form, not because of a swing, not because of a report, but simply because of his face. After retiring, Sammy started using a skin treatment cream recommended by his doctor. The cream lightened his pigment, a normal physiological reaction for someone with high melanin. But America didn't see science. America only saw a brown-skinned icon become lighter, and instead of asking why, people laughed as if the change on his face was national entertainment. The first photos of Sammy with lighter skin spread online like wildfire. Memes popped up like mushrooms. White Sammy, the bleached home run king, Michael Jackson 2.0, vicious, hateful jokes shared tens of thousands of times. He was no longer a human being. He became a meme, a distorted image used for cheap laughs before work. In group chats, on Twitter, on Reddit, people dissected every pixel of his face, mocked every shade of his skin, criticized every tiny change in his appearance. They forgot that behind the photo was a man who once stood in the middle of a stadium and gave them hope. They forgot the pain, the loneliness, the impoverished childhood that forged him. Instead they saw him through likes, cheap laughs, and heartless sarcasm. And for Sammy, that blow hurt worse than any scandal. One Hall of Fame voter even publicly declared he would refuse to vote for Sammy simply because of his bleached skin. Not because of stats, not because of scandals, not because of steroid suspicions, but because of his face. A reason so petty, to erase a career so massive, but that was the America Sammy had to face, where a hero can be wiped out just for no longer fitting the image the public wants to remember. Sammy tried to explain, "I use a cream that softens and brightens my skin." But no one listened. No one cared about the truth. They only cared about the more entertaining story, the one that turned him into a joke. One day in Miami, while Sammy was taking his young son out for lunch, a group of teenagers secretly snapped photos of him and burst out laughing. Not because they recognized the baseball legend, but because they recognized White Sammy. When those pictures hit the internet hours later, thousands of comments flooded in, most of them mocking. That night, sitting in the living room, his little boy, still in elementary school, walked up and asked Papa, "Why do they laugh at you?" No swing, no scandal, no congressional hearing ever hurt him like that question. Sammy had faced hatred, he had faced suspicion, he had faced silence, but nothing dropped his heart deeper than the innocent eyes of his son trying to understand why the world was so cruel to the father he loved most. He hugged his boy and said nothing, because how could he explain to a child that the world sometimes hurts people for no reason at all? How could he explain that sometimes people laugh just because they're afraid to face the truth that they once needed him, once loved him, once put him on a pedestal, and laughing at him now makes them feel less guilty for abandoning him? That night Sammy went into the bathroom and stared into the mirror for a long time. The face looking back wasn't the man he once knew, the man of the summer of '98. Not the hero who ran around the field waving the American flag, not the legend the whole world once praised. It was a face distorted by the merciless memory of the public, a victim of an internet age that no longer distinguishes between a human being and entertainment. He gently touched his cheek where the light reflected brightest, and he understood this wasn't a scar made by time. This was a scar the world carved into him, a world that once applauded him, now laughed at him, a world that once called him a hero, now called him a clown. But what kept Sammy standing, breathing, still living, was the same child who asked him the most painful question: his children, his family, the things that never mocked him. And Sammy swore his son would not grow up believing the world has the right to decide his father's worth. But before he could find peace again, he still had to face one more cruelty, a cruelty from the very place that should have honored him most: baseball history. And it began with 3 fateful words: Hall of Fame. And then, as if the wounds to his appearance weren't deep enough, Sammy entered the darkest chapter of his life, a chapter no legend should ever have to endure, being erased from history. The Hall of Fame, the place where baseball's immortals are enshrined, where the greatest names in the sport are spoken forever, where the name Sammy Sosa, 609 home runs, should have been carved with reverence, slammed its door in his face for an entire decade. His first year on the ballot, Sammy received only 12.5% of the vote, low, but there was still hope. The second year the number plummeted. The third year, it became a punchline. From the 4th to the 10th year, he never once crossed the 5% threshold needed to stay on the ballot. With a career greater than many Hall of Famers, with a 1998 summer that changed the entire league, with stats in the top tier of MLB history, Sammy was thrown out like a ghost. The same writers who once praised him now wrote, "Not worth serious consideration." Some voters even publicly declared they would never vote for a man who bleached his skin. Those words didn't just insult him, they insulted his childhood, every scar he carried through life. And MLB? They chose to look away. In official MLB recaps of the summer of 1998, most highlights only show McGwire. Sammy's home runs, the ones that made America stand up, are cut, removed, turned into meaningless blank space. ESPN, which once called him the man who saved baseball, now only mentions him when talking about steroids, the corked bat, or some list of disgraced names. MLB Network, which spends hours every week celebrating legends, rarely mentions him beyond a passing line. And in special programs commemorating the '98 home run race, Sammy's footage is sometimes just a few seconds, or completely absent. They are not just forgetting him, they are burying him. A veteran Chicago Tribune reporter once said a line Sammy never forgot: "They buried the man who once saved the sport. They buried him, the man who saved an entire sport from the brink of despair." And the most painful part, not that he didn't get into the Hall of Fame, but that he is no longer spoken of as part of the story he helped write. One night in Dubai, Sammy sat alone in his huge living room with only a small lamp on. The TV was tuned to MLB Network. The show was top 10 baseball moments of the 1990s. He watched, his heart clenched when McGwire appeared. Busch Stadium exploding. The crowd roaring like 1998 had come alive again. Then the segment ended. No Sammy, no Wrigley Field detonating when he hit his 20th homer in June. No moment of him running with the American flag. No radiant smile of the man who made America believe baseball was still the shared dream. He had been erased from memory, as if he never existed. Sammy turned off the TV, sat motionless. The feeling wasn't self-pity, it was emptiness, as if a piece of his soul had been taken. He went into his office, opened a wooden cabinet, and pulled out an old VHS box. Inside were highlight tapes the Cubs had sent him from the '90s. Dust coated the edges. Sammy put one in the player. The screen flickered for a few seconds, then lit up. And then, like a greeting from another world, there he was. 1998 Sammy, standing in the middle of Wrigley Field, face glowing, body powerful, swing full of fire, the crowd roaring earth-shakingly. Slammin' Sammy, Sosa, 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 the man who saved baseball. All of America seemed to embrace him in that moment. Sammy placed his hand on the screen, on the image of that radiant young man, the man he once was, the man the world once loved. But then his hand trembled. He didn't know if it was from emotion or pain. Those images were no longer pride. They were a cruel reminder that the world no longer wanted him. Tears fell, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly like rain in the desert night. He whispered to himself, "Why? Why did they forget me?" There was no answer. Because the truth is too cruel, some heroes are not hated. They are simply left behind. In the days that followed, Sammy stopped turning on the TV, stopped watching MLB highlights, stopped reading newspapers, stopped searching his name online. He knew every search was just opening the door for more pain. But every night, when the house fell silent and the wind blew through the long dark outside the windows, Sammy did the one thing he tried to avoid all day. He played the old highlight tape again, not for pride, not for regret, but to remind himself that he was real, that 1998 was not a dream, that he was once loved, once honored, once carried an entire nation on his shoulders. And when the screen went dark and the room returned to darkness, only one thought remained, the thought that had haunted him for years: if the world forgets me, who am I now? But the darkness Sammy was staring into was not the end, because before he could find peace again, he had to face the greatest cruelty of his life, the truth that America, the country he once saved, had deliberately erased his name. But from that despair, a small light began to return, from a place he never expected: himself, his family, and the path he chose to rewrite his legacy, without needing the Hall of Fame. But while America locked the door of memory, and let his name sink into darkness, there was still one place, a small but resilient land, where the name Sammy Sosa was spoken with the purest pride: the Dominican Republic. His homeland never forgot its great son, even when the world turned away. In America, Sammy is debate. In America, he is scandal. In America, he is the ghost of the steroid era. But, in the Dominican, he is legend. He is faith. He is proof that a poor child can touch the sky. When Sammy returned to Consuelo after years away, every street turned into a small parade. Children ran after his car. Adults waved. Old men placed hands over their hearts as he passed. No analysis, no suspicion, no but, no if, only the pure pride only a homeland can give its child. In America, a Sosa 21 jersey is rarely seen in the stands. But in the Dominican, it appears on every dirt field, every sandy lot, every poor neighborhood. Skinny kids in worn-out flip-flops or barefoot wear faded old jerseys with the number 21 clearly visible, the number of hope. When they step into the batter's box, they don't look at the bat, they look at the dream. And that dream is named Sammy Sosa. In America, they ask, does Sosa deserve forgiveness? In the Dominican they ask, why did America forget our hero? That cruel contrast became Sammy's salvation, because in the Dominican, he is not scandal, he is not steroid suspicion, he is not a meme, he is the son of this land. The man who carried Dominican skin, breath, poverty and will into world history. Sammy knows his homeland shaped him, but he also gave back more than anyone outside understands. He built over 15 baseball fields for poor kids, kids just like he once was, without money for gloves, bats or coaches. Those fields sit in dusty neighborhoods, surrounded by rusted tin roofs and bumpy dirt roads. But to the kids, they are paradise. Sammy doesn't just show up for ribbon cuttings. He plays, he pitches, he adjusts each child's stance, he asks their names, their dreams, whether they like inside or outside pitches. He does what America no longer lets him do, he inspires. One afternoon, while coaching kids at a field in Santo Domingo, a boy no older than 10 ran up, hugged him, and said in a trembling voice, "I want to be like you, even if America doesn't want you." Sammy froze. The man who once ran around Wrigley waving the American flag, the symbol of the immigrant dream, was now comforted by a poor boy back home. A man America once worshipped, and then discarded, loved unconditionally, without calculation or indifference by the Dominican. Whether he arrives in an expensive suit or a simple t-shirt, whether his skin is lighter or his hair dyed, no matter what time turns him into, in the Dominican, he is still the same old Sammy. One evening, while walking past his old neighborhood in Consuelo, an elderly woman recognized him and burst into tears, not from disappointment, not from judgment, from pride. She took his hands and whispered, "You are our dream." Even if the world forgets, we will never forget. In that moment, Sammy understood what his years of exile in America never taught him. He doesn't need the Hall of Fame to be immortal. He is already etched into the DNA of a small but big-hearted nation. And right there in the Dominican, he found himself again, not the legend, not the controversial icon, but Maria's son, the shoeshine boy, the poor worker who once looked at the sky and wished it were bigger than his calloused hands. In America, he is the fallen hero. In the Dominican, he is El Gran Sammy. People still say his name at every meal, every conversation, every dusty field. They tell his story like a modern fairy tale, and most importantly, here he is not mocked, ridiculed or treated like a joke. Here he gets to be human again. The Dominican Republic is not just where he was born, it is the only place that still holds his soul, and when he leaves, when the plane takes him back to Miami or Dubai, he always looks down at the poor rooftops below and whispers, "At least here, my name still means something." But Sammy's journey does not end in the Dominican. The light he found back home was only the beginning, because the greatest thing in his life, redemption, peace, and his true legacy, is waiting in the final chapter. At age 57, he will understand that he doesn't need America's forgiveness to find himself again. He only needs to know who he has become. And that chapter is the end, where the darkness recedes and a different light appears. But Sammy's healing journey didn't come only from his homeland. It came from something smaller, quieter, yet stronger than any stadium: family. After years of being abandoned by America, mocked by the media, with the Hall of Fame door slammed shut, Sammy finally found something neither fame nor money ever gave him: peace. And that peace wore the faces of his children, and the wife who stood by him when the whole world turned away. Sammy never talks much publicly about his family. He understands the most precious things must be shielded from judgmental light. But to those close to him, they know family saved Sammy from the darkness. Every morning, even when his back hurts so badly he can barely stand straight, he still walks out to the backyard with his sons and daughters, picks up a little plastic bat, and teaches them how to stand firm, keep their shoulders level, rotate their hips, hear the sound of ball meeting bat. Don't swing with fear, he says, swing with joy. It's not just a baseball lesson, it's a life lesson. One day when his son struggled with a swing and missed, the boy sighed, looked up at his dad, and asked, "Papa, were you really the best?" Sammy smiled, touched his shoulder, and answered softly, "Your swing is more important than my past." That sentence is the most beautiful confession of his life. He's not trying to fix history, not trying to win back public opinion, not begging the Hall of Fame. He's only trying to help his children build a better future than the one he had. In the evenings when the old back pain from thousands of 1998 swings and grueling seasons keeps him awake, he tosses and turns. But when he hears a soft voice call, "Papa, read me a story," Sammy props himself up, grabs a children's book, and reads in a quiet, sometimes halting voice because of the pain. He doesn't read out of duty. He reads because it's the only thing that makes him forget the years darkness surrounded him. His family never asks about the Hall of Fame, never asks about the 2005 hearing, never asks why his face changed, never asks why America went silent. They just need him. And for Sammy, that is stronger than any title he ever lost. His wife Sonia is the shoulder the public never saw. When the corked-bat scandal engulfed him, when he was mocked for lighter skin, when he was voted out of the Hall of Fame year after year, she was the one who whispered, "Let them talk. We know who you are." She didn't love the legend. She didn't love the hero. She loved the wounded man who kept standing. Sammy once said the thing that made him realize family is the most beautiful part of his life wasn't the happy moments, it was how they treated him when he faced darkness. In the years in Dubai and Miami, family was the only light that never went out. Quiet dinners around a small table replaced the roar of crowds he once knew. Family movie nights replaced stadium lights. Beach trips with the kids replaced MVP awards. He said in one rare interview, "I don't need the Hall of Fame, I need peace." But that peace is not surrender. It is victory. A quiet victory over the world that tried to break him. Sammy no longer feels the need to prove anything to America. He doesn't need them to restore his name in 1998 highlights. Doesn't need the Cooperstown doors to open. Doesn't need the media to praise him again after years of silence, because at this point he understands what the greatest people sometimes realize too late. True legacy isn't in a museum, it's in the people who love you. And Sammy has spent these recent years rebuilding his life in a quieter but deeper way than any MVP trophy. He teaches his children the value of effort, not the spotlight. He tells them baseball is joy, not a burden. He talks about the Dominican like it's childhood paradise. He tells them failure is not the end, but the place to start again. Once when his daughter asked Papa, "Why don't you play on TV anymore?" Sammy didn't dodge. He looked at her, smiled gently, and said, "Because now I play here with you." That moment is worth more than any Hall of Fame plaque. And because of his family, Sammy began to see his life not through the lens of scandal, but through the lens of survival. He understands he is still here, still loving, still loved, even if America forgot him. But before we close the story, there is one final chapter, a chapter not about falling, not about abandonment, not about pain, but about the legacy he chooses to leave behind. A chapter with no tears of defeat, but with the light of a man who has lived long enough to know what truly matters. And then as the long journey of a man's life reaches its final pages, the story of Sammy Sosa is no longer just his own. It becomes a mirror reflecting how America treats its heroes. A brutal truth few dare to say out loud: America falls in love fast, and forgets even faster. Sammy was once the soul of the summer of 1998. He was once the heartbeat of Wrigley Field. He was once the symbol that made immigrant children believe the American dream was real. He was once the light that lifted all of MLB out of the post-strike division. But America doesn't love a person. America loves an image. They loved the crack of the bat. They loved the radiant smile in the middle of the field. They loved the feeling of believing in miracles again. They loved the myth of Sosa, not the human being Sammy. And when that image cracked, when the first fracture appeared, when scandals, suspicions, and hearings came crashing in, America did what it does best: withdrew its love as if it had never existed. No chance to explain, no context, no empathy. Sammy is not the only case, but he is the most perfect example. A hero created by America's own hunger, and destroyed by America's own unrealistic expectations. When a nation loves a hero for being flawless, it will abandon him the moment it discovers he is merely human. Why was Sammy erased from history? The reason isn't only the corked bat, or the steroid era. The reason lies in American cultural DNA. When we idolize someone beyond human limits, we are also ready to bury them deepest when they take one wrong step. Sammy didn't just fight scandals, he fought prejudice, for being Latino, for coming from a poor Dominican Republic, for having dark skin, for speaking heavily accented English, for not fitting the classic all-American hero mold. That's the thing people rarely say, but it's what Sammy felt in every breath, because he didn't just have to beat opponents on the field. He had to beat the standard of an America that wants its heroes to speak perfect English, behave perfectly, never make mistakes, never have cracks, and above all never be different. Sammy was different, and that difference both lifted him up and dragged him down. When MLB started cutting him out of 1998 highlights, it wasn't just a decision about scandal, it was a decision about the image America wants to keep for its history. And Sammy, with his dirt-poor roots, his immigrant smile, his exuberant style, his unfiltered directness, no longer fit that mold. The cruelest part is, America didn't forget him because he failed. America forgot him because he wasn't perfect. But what America never realized, and perhaps never understood, is that every miracle is made by people who carry cracks inside them. Sammy Sosa didn't come from privilege. He didn't come from elite academies. He didn't come from baseball royalty. He came from leaking roofs, cold meals, torn shoes, absolute darkness. To rise, he had to fight 10 times harder. To shine, he had to sacrifice 100 times more. And to carry the faith of an entire nation on his shoulders, he had to pay with pieces of himself. No one is perfect enough to bear that weight, yet America demanded perfection from him. Only when he was gone did they begin to see the cost of forgetting. That is the tragedy of every forgotten hero. We do not judge them by what they gave us, but by the moment they stumbled. Sammy was not perfect, but he was ours. He is part of our history. He is part of the most beautiful baseball summer we ever had. If we forget him, we don't just forget a man, we forget the very essence of being human, accepting wounds, honoring effort, and understanding that the greatest sacrifices always come from imperfect souls. He was imperfect, but he was ours. And America forgot him not because he failed, but because we demanded perfection from a man born in brokenness. And perhaps the time has come for America, the baseball fans, the ones who once roared for the swings of 1998, to do one thing: look back and reevaluate Sammy Sosa's legacy before history buries forever the man who once saved it. Once saved. Heroes are not always flawless. Sometimes they are wounded, sometimes they are wrong, but if we only remember the bad in them, then we are the ones who forget the meaning of gratitude. And Sammy's story, like every most beautiful tragedy, reminds us that a nation is not strong because it has perfect heroes. A nation is strong because it knows how to honor those who fell after carrying it through the darkness. Sammy Sosa is that kind of man, and it's time we remember it. If you believe heroes like Sammy Sosa deserve to be remembered instead of buried in silence, hit subscribe so we can keep telling the stories history has forgotten. Thank you for walking with us, and see you in the next video, where we continue shining light on the souls who once saved an era and then vanished from the spotlight.